Hey everyone, it's Colin with Eagle Eyes Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. And today I'm going to be building a display style base for an Astraeus super heavy tank. And what makes this base building video different is that it's building a base for a model whose feet aren't going to be on the base. So you can build a little bit more of a display style base for like flyers or things that are on flying stands like jump troops or jet bikes or land speeders or something like that. You're less restricted than you are with models whose feet have to be pinned into the base or they have to be mounted on the base to where they're sitting flat and they're adhered securely. With the Astraeus, it's on a like 200 millimeter base. This thing is huge. And it has this beefy flight stand that this gigantic tank gets mounted on. I'm almost done painting the tank, and usually I do the base ahead of time because I like having the base done, and then when I spend all the time doing painting the model, like when I finish painting the model, I want to put it on the base and be done with it. So, but I wanted to record this process. And so the base will take a little bit longer. But because the model's not mounted on the base, I can really go nuts with this base. And the only restriction is going to be a height restriction. I need to stay, maybe an inch below the flying stand. This flying stand has been glued to the base with 2-part epoxy. And so it's almost certainly not going anywhere. And then we're going to fill it in with this resin putty around the flying stand, and then it's for sure not going anywhere. So what I'm going to use today is called Magic Sculpt, and this is a 2-part resin putty. I got mine at, I think, Tap Plastics. This stuff is fantastic. I really, really like it for stuff like this. For doing bases, doing large bases, doing display bases. This stuff is just great. It dries super hard. It holds volume. It doesn't run. Like, it's just great. It's just a great product. It's a little pricey, but so it comes in 2 pieces. This is the resin, and then this is the hardener. So both of these are inert until you mix them together, and then they activate and become a putty that's going to harden. Because I've had this for years, and you can see it's, obviously it's still workable because there isn't a hardening agent in it. So I'm going to take out a pretty good chunk. Probably need a little bit more than that. And remember, this is half of what we're going to use to cover the base. So on larger bases, or like if I wanted to build up, excuse me, if I wanted a model to sit taller, like if I wanted to build up a night base or something, I would use this over using, cork or something like that. This just gives a nice smooth. You can texture this stuff too. You can do whatever you want with this as far as basing goes. Get my hands a little wet, and then just mix it. And don't worry, it's not going to be 5 minutes of me mixing this. It goes together pretty quick. So that's just me wetting my hands with water just to kind of get it a little bit more workable, a little less sticky. And then you want to blend this until, until it's even. A little bit more water. I might have to mix a little bit more. This might not be enough. Now I don't want to coat this in like an inch or more of putty. I don't want the putty itself to be, up to here. I just need a layer. And what we're using this for is basically just variation in the ground to make it look more natural. We don't want a flat. I don't want to start with just a flat base. The ground usually isn't perfectly flat, so I get it here, and then I can just kind of work it. Now this is all going to be covered later on in the process, so I don't have to. This does not have to be perfect. This does not have to look pretty. This is all going to be covered up with other elements of this base. One of the things I want to make sure is just that I have some variation in height here, so that the next layers of basing material that I'm going to put on this base are uneven. Like it would be a waste of time if I were to do this kind of resin putty step and then make it flat. That's not what I want to do, because that's just adding time for no reason. So I just want this to be uneven, because I'll be going over it with kind of earth effects. I'll be going over it with, rocks and things like that. So if those are all kind of on a flat base, it just doesn't look as natural. So you can see we have some variation in height, but not a ton. You don't have to get more, because that was not even close to enough. Come on. There we go. The nice thing about this stuff too is it's not heavy, but it's heavier than technical paint and stuff like that. So it will add a little bit of weight to the base. And I was actually really impressed with how balanced the Astraeus is on the flight stand, because it's a huge model. So that they had to do that. They had to be very careful. The tank itself, it just sits. It's a kind of a shallow pin, and it just sits on that flight base. It's not internal to the tank, so it's not a very, I guess, robust connection point for the flight stand for how big the tank is. It's bigger than a Bing blade. So for that thing to balance on the flight stand, it just speaks to how well designed the model is, because it just balances right on there. I'll probably throw a magnet or a pin or something in there, just to help it stay there during games and stuff. But I was really impressed. So this will give your hands a little bit of a workout, but again, it doesn't take very long to get a good mix. So that's mixed. And then, obviously this is random. Obviously I didn't, think through everything I wanted to do with this base before I got it on the table and started filming. I have a general idea of what I'd like to do, but not anything really specific. And that's what's fun about basing, I think. You don't have to have necessarily, you want to have a general plan, but you don't have to have like a plan. You don't have to, okay, well this stick is going to go here and this, tree is going to go there. No. It depends on the base, of course, but with a flying base like this, where I don't have to worry about feet, it just gives you so much more freedom than. So building up a little bit higher on this side. I don't know what side of the model this is. Doesn't really matter to me. Because there's not going to be anything like directional on the base. It's just going to be a natural base. So this is for spatial farming that I've been working on commission, and they are all on snow bases. They're on like runic mountain bases from Secret Weapon Miniatures, and so there are some stones, and there are, there's just a lot of snow. So that also gives me a lot of freedom when building this base, because it doesn't have to be, a lot of it's going to get covered in snow. So it doesn't, the layers of detail don't really, like, I'm not building rubble, right? So I don't have to have coherent kind of, okay, this is this brick and fell here, and there's a sectional wall here, and there are shell casings here and skulls, and it doesn't have to tell that cohesive of a story, the basing. So now I'm just getting kind of sharp creases out, and because we don't want any sharp lines basically in that step. It'll look unnatural. Obviously, there aren't a lot of corners in the ground, so we just want to make sure that that's even. And then this stuff will just come off if you wash your hands, but I wanted to get a lot of it off just with a paper towel. So that's it for the resin part, and you can see that we've built up that base, I mean, a pretty good amount. That's a pretty good bit of height, especially on this side. But it still gives us a lot of room to work, because remember, we want to stop about here, because I just don't, the last thing I want is to get it on the base and then find out I built the base too high. So the tank sits above it, the part that goes on the tank is even higher than that, but then the tank comes down. The tank like sits flat here, but then it comes down around, over the base. So just to be careful, and also if I build it too high, you're not going to be able to see the base under the tank. And we want to actually see these elements under the tank. So I'm going to go into, I have a box, I have different boxes for basing. I have a snow box, I have a rubble box. This is kind of my natural element box. And here I have some just pieces of wood, I have some cork, I have some tan bark. This is just tan bark from, somebody's yard. I have some potting soil that's been dried out in the oven because it was wintertime. You can just leave it outside in the summer and just dry it out completely. This stuff is great. I love this stuff. And this is, I don't know what that is. But we're going to concentrate today on placing, or in this segment, we're gonna concentrate on placing some wood and some tan bark, just to get some elements on the base that are gonna look cool when they're painted up. So when we're looking at these pieces, we really want to make sure that we get. Oh, that would be cool. That we get some good pieces, but we also get like some realistic pieces. Like this might be a little big, but this would look cool as like a rock, not painted as wood, but painted as rock. That would look really cool, but I don't know that I really want to risk how tall that would be. I might save that for another project. This, on the other hand, can be wood, not rock, and that has a nice curve to it. That fits in nicely with kind of that flight stand, kind of the curvature of the flight stand there, and can kind of hide the flight stand a little bit. And then again, this is going to be painted like kind of a fallen tree, kind of fallen wood, like it is. And then it's going to have kind of a layer of snow on top. So this flat area works really well for that. So I think this is just mulch as well. This is just decorative, like from, for landscaping is what a lot of this is from. And then there will be another layer of stuff that we'll put in as well after these big elements are placed. So I'm just going to press this into the resin and kind of wiggle it a little bit. And now we're going to fill in around the sides of this with the ground texture. So I don't really need to work this too much. I don't want this obviously to bubble up around it. Like you can see here how this has kind of pushed the resin out. I don't want that. I can come back and just fill in so it looks like it's kind of, getting buried under the dirt there. And this resin will 100% hold this in place forever. This is going to harden and keep that there. I do want to put one more piece of wood before I place a couple of rocks, because these are going to be painted up like rocks. These are not going to stay wood. These are going to be painted like rocks. Tan bark is cool because it has a really, really good texture, but you can also kind of come in here and break it up and get some smaller pieces. And these are just, pliers or wire cutters. So like if I wanted that rock to be shorter, I can just come in and cut that up. And then I have, some smaller rocks to kind of scatter around. And this is fun. This is great. I love doing this stuff. So this piece I don't think is going to work. So we don't want like a V, right? That doesn't look right. We don't want it to necessarily be parallel. We want it to kind of be, we don't want it to be like that, perpendicular. That doesn't necessarily look good. So I just don't know. Do I have a piece with a flat end? If I have a piece with a flat end, I can kind of get it to look like they're two parts of the same, like this. That'll work. So you see those two the flatness of the end kind of draws these two pieces together. So these look like they could be two pieces of the same kind of tree, or the same, that kind of fell at the same time alongside each other. And I kind of like how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and wiggle that in there, push up on the sides to kind of get it. Because if this puckers out from that piece of wood, when I go to add the other basing elements later, that bump will still be there and it'll still look a little unnatural. So we have some wood on the base now. Now we're going to throw some of these rocks, some of these tan bark rocks. I don't want to use this big one because I think we already have a couple of big elements on the base already. So I'm going to use kind of this one. We can put one out near the edge here. And after this dries, we're going to come back when we do some of the other elements, we're going to come back and we're going to seal these with a very, very thin coat of, or a coat of thinned down PVA glue. And that's going to kind of seal those in place. And because obviously they're natural materials, they're very porous. And we're not just going to paint right over the top of, tan bark. So, and then here we have another kind of rocky. This one looks more like rock than the others. So, but that's going to be like when this is covered with snow, just very, very little of that is actually going to show. But that's fine. It also just provides some height variation, some visual interest, and that's fine. We don't need everything on the base to be the star of the show. We just need enough of a natural element. I'm actually going to grab. I have. And then this, so I have my kind of wood box for basing, and then this is like my rubble slash, this is my rubble slash rock box, and I think I have, see, like I have, these are almost like wall chip, like wall rubble. I don't want to use those. I have some bricks. I don't want to use those because obviously we're doing natural elements. But I do have, these are from the old GW basing kit. I do have some actual kind of slate chunks for rocks. And these are great because these are like really, really big if you want to put them on an infantry base. These are a little tougher to place because they take up so much space, and you, like I said, you need the feet to be able to be positioned on the base. But for our purposes, these are fantastic. These are really a good size for what we're doing today. And a lot of this will get obscured. A lot of this, won't rate. I mean, a lot of this just won't show up when it comes time to paint. We're not going to intentionally cover all of this with the other basing materials, but I want it in place now, just in case. If it gets covered, it gets covered. C'est la vie. That's part of doing this style of basing is sometimes stuff get covered up, and when you walk around, you see rocks that are, there are a lot of rocks underground. So, not everything is going to show up in the final process, but we're going to lay the groundwork so that if we did want something there, or we do want something to show up, then it's there and it's naturally integrated into this kind of substrate, this kind of basing layer below the texture layer that we're going to do next. So that way, when I go in with the texture layer, all of this is integrated into the base. And you'll notice I haven't put on any skulls. I haven't put on anything I haven't put on any smaller rocks. This is just kind of the wide angle foundation for the next step and the next step. So after this, we left out a piece. That's fine. Right there. So after this, we're going to let this dry. It'll take, I don't know, a few hours, 12 hours. it takes a while to dry. And this base there is some weight to this base now, which is really nice, especially for something like a Forge World Flyer or something like that that's heavy. It's nice to have some heft to the base. So with the rocks and with the resin, it's got some weight to it now. But this looks a little random and a little haphazard. I really like the wood pieces on it. I think that's going to look really good. These are all going to be rocks, and then we're going to do a layer of, after this dries, we're going to come back and we're going to do a layer of ground cover, like earth paste, basically. And then we can add some more kind of smaller rocks and smaller elements to it when we do that layer, and get just another layer of texture, another layer of interest, integrate these all more into the base. So we're going to let this dry, and we're going to come back and detail this thing up a little bit and let that dry, prime it, and then paint it, and then do the snow effects. So that's step one, and we'll be right back for step two. And we're back, and the resin has dried, and so these are all locked in. All of these elements on the base are all locked in. They're not going anywhere. And now it's time to add the ground cover and add some kind of the second layer of elements to this base. So for that, what I'm going to use is Vallejo Earth Texture Acrylic. Now I'm using this for a number of reasons. One is it's really fine and it covers really well. I really like it. Because it's a snow base, I'm just going to use kind of a basic texture. If this were going to be a desert base, or if this was going to be a base that needed the ground cover element to kind of stand on its own, then I would approach the ground cover differently, which I'll do in another video. I'd either do kind of a cracked earth and a little bit of texture, or do a more gritty earth, like the simple base construction video from on the Patreon. So because this is a snow base, and because most of the base is going to be covered in snow, I can really simplify the ground cover and make that part of this build a lot easier. So usually if I'm just doing little bases, I'll use this little Tamiya tool for applying texture. It cleans off really easily. It has a little scoop end and a little spatula end. But because this is a gigantic base, I'm going to be using this craft store brush. It's a size 12. Not that it matters. But this is one of those that I stole from my kids. So I'm just going to pick up a bunch of texture. We want to work in around these other elements that we put on the base, and even onto parts of those elements, to really integrate them into the base so they're not, standing on their own. We want an irregular texture. That's why you can see I'm kind of stippling here. I'm not brushing this on. I don't want brush strokes, even though it's going to be, mostly covered with snow. It's important to still be disciplined about how we're applying this. We don't want to just, slap it on and brush it on and say, oh, that's good enough. We don't want to develop bad habits. So and it's okay to get some of this on the wood there. Totally fine. I do want to kind of fill in next to this wood to really integrate it. And this is a very tight space in here. I'm obviously not getting that giant brush, so I'm taking a destroyed, medium layer brush, or any kind of Citadel brush. This brush I use for, stuff like this. And you can use, any kind of technical paint, like GW Technical, any of their kind of grainy technical paints are fine for this. I like the Vallejo just because it's a giant tub for, a good price. I really like the GW Technical paints. I have a bunch of them. I have some from AK. I mean, all the big companies really um, do them, and they're all pretty good. So, um, you don't have to use Vallejo texture. It's not a you can use any textured paint, but you do want that texture for the parts of this that are going to peek out underneath the snow. You do want, we'll paint it, we'll do a little dry brushing, and okay, I don't want that though. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, but I'm going to make sure that, because I don't want like a hard line on this flight stand, but I am going to make sure, I am going to go through and make sure that snow is going to be the thing that kind of sets that line on the flight stand. It's not going to be ground texture. Ground texture is not going to set that line. Snow is going to set that line because it'll just look way more natural to have the snow kind of drifting. But I still want to make sure that we're not accidentally getting texture up on the flight stand. And that'll just be primed black with, everything else with the base. So we just keep going with this texture. I'm using this little brush again because that big craft brush isn't going to get in here. And not just obliterate all these rocks and everything that we put in there. Again, just making sure you keep it off the you can see, again, I'm not brushing, I'm just kind of dabbing because I want an irregular ground texture. I don't want an even texture. Even though we're going to be covering it, so I want to take out a lot of those rounded elements. I want to take out any kind of straight lines out of the texture and just make sure I don't have any of those kind of sneaking in there. So there we go. I can probably switch back to that larger brush here in a second. Just get this all kind of sorted out down here. There we go. And again, just dab. There's a lot of open area on this base, and that's fine. We don't want to fill it up, right? We don't want this to just be, a field of rocks or a field of just, big stones everywhere. Because that's just not, you're not going to see most of this base. And I really want those wood elements to really stand out, because I think it's just a really cool feature. But we are going to go through and we're going to add another kind of size of rock. I'm not going to go through and add slate chips. Those smaller slate chips are just too small for this kind of snow basing, because we're not just doing a dusting of snow. This is going to be pretty well covered in snow, like the rest of the army. So you can see we have this uneven ground texture. Now it's looking a bit more integrated as a base. And again, it's less involved because it's going to be covered in snow. And you'll see when we get to the snow part of this, how that comes together. But now I'm going to take some smaller rocks and I'm going to start placing these around. And these are at a different elevation on the basing. These are, oops. See, I missed. So if you're not rotating the base when you're painting it, you're going to miss, like I missed the whole back side of this rock here. That's why it's great that this has a bit longer working time. So these are a different elevation on the base. The other rocks are going to be kind of integrated, into the ground, like they're sticking out of the ground. These are more kind of sitting on top of the ground, which is fine. That works. And then we're going to go through with some thin PVA and kind of seal all this later. So that'll also help keep these rocks in place. These rocks you're not really going to notice too much once we really get into doing the snow basing. But again, where we do have these sticking out, I want them to be natural. I want them to be there. If that makes sense. And then, so that's pretty good. Again, because it's a little sparse. If this were going to be a standalone base, that would be a little sparse. I would keep going. But again, covering it in snow gives us a lot of freedom. So one of my favorite things ever is the Citadel Skulls box. $25 for like 400 skulls. It's one of the greatest releases of all time. I'm a crazy person, and I clean the mold lines off the skulls. So what I'll do is I'll sit there, I'll clean off the mold lines, and then I'll throw them in this little salsa container. And then when I need a skull, I can just come in here, like I can take this Tyranid skull, and I can just kind of put it under that rock there. And then when I'm painting the base and when I'm doing the snow, I can try and make sure that as I'm applying the snow, that I don't completely cover that skull. So it's kind of a feature back there, just like a little Easter egg. We could put another one over here. That one will probably get mostly covered, but it wouldn't be the Grimdark without skulls. So kind of get that skull there, maybe one underneath the edge of the wood here, kind of like the Tyranid skull on the other side. Maybe another Tyranid skull back among these rocks. Maybe a human skull next to it. Maybe another humanoid skull over here. And again, these are opportunities to kind of tell a story. I want to stay away from the middle because I know I'm going to be building up. I know I'm going to be building up the snow around the flight base. So this could have been an old battlefield between Tyranids and the local populations, and the space wolves have shown up to cleanse the planet, or something. So, and this basing material will hold this stuff in place. We'll come back, like I said, with some thin down PVA and to seal the tan bark and the wood elements for painting. Kind of stick that under, perfect. Stick that under the alcove right there. So when we do that, we can hit the rocks and stuff with a little bit of very, very thin PVA, and that'll help adhere them as well. And that's really it. I mean, that's it for the Astraeus base. The real heavy lifting is going to come when we're doing the painting and when we're doing the snow. So that's it for the base construction. A little bit more elaborate, some different elements used here. So this one's a lot of fun, and I'll be bringing in even more elements, some more natural elements when it comes time, like right before painting. After all this is dried, we're going to do another little layer of natural elements. So looking forward to that, and then it'll be time for painting. So thank you, and hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Hope you are inspired to make some, pretty kick-ass bases, and we'll see you again soon to paint this beast. So, thanks.